Welcome everyone to another episode of Kevin Reshaw Presents here on channel GBoot2786. It is Random Topic Tuesdays. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you are blessed and doing safe. We will get started in a little bit with our special guest, Mr. veteran journalist Albert Lanier. Al and I are going to have a discussion about the mysterious death of Dorothy Kill Gallen. So y'all just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Put your comments in the comment box. Let us know you're watching live. Like, share, and subscribe to the channels. If you're watching on Facebook, you may comment and like. You may also share. Same thing on Periscope and on my other YouTube channel, Gavin Richard, and GBoot2786, of course, our main channel. So y'all tune in. We'll get started in the next couple of minutes. You don't want to miss it. All right, we are live. Good evening, friends and family. Greetings. As I'm sitting here in my hotel room in the Red Stick City, the capital of Louisiana, Baton Rouge. I'm here on some business and just trying to enjoy myself a little bit and unwind. I never stop to grind and hustle. You guys be sure and be on the lookout this week. We're going to be launching our, speaking of grind, coming soon, our website for Nani's Creole Seasoning Blends. That is the company for my new seasoning company, Spice. You guys have seen that, so be on the lookout for that. It should be coming soon. Something else I wanted to say too, I don't know if anybody has having any trouble, but I'm checking on my Facebook page, and apparently it cannot load the video. Can't load the live stream. So I'm going to have to deal with that because I couldn't play it when I tried to check on my phone, and it messes up with my viewers. Some of you are not watching through GBoot. Some of you may be watching through Facebook. I see a few people that are on Periscope, and I know it's late, so some people may not be coming in just yet. But usually as we get started, more and more people will show up. But make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, we are aware of the people that watch this channel. We are aware of people who have tried to put a shadow ban, YouTube, and not just YouTube, but Facebook as well. Uh, we have issues with Twitter. I've had problems with them in the past, but mostly it's been YouTube for the most part. I get these BS copyright strikes from time to time on Facebook. I don't know why, with fair use and so forth. But nevertheless, the grind doesn't stop, and I'm privileged to say that I've reached over 915 followers and subscribers. So thank you for that. We are joined by our guest, Mr. Albert Lanier. I'm going to bring him on in a second. So just hang on, Al. I see that you're available. You're in the room waiting to start, but I'm just taking a little house cleaning right quick. So, guys, what we're going to be talking about tonight is the mysterious death of Dorothy Kilgallen. Now, some of you are not aware of who Dorothy Kilgallen is. She's ahead of our time, especially my time. But we will put an image of her up so you guys may be familiar with her, or just take a look. You can Google her. This is Dorothy Kilgallen. She was a veteran journalist with the New York Evening Journal. And at one point, she was one of the top gossip columnists and most recognized names in journalism back in the 1950s and up to her death in 1965. She was most known also as a regular panelist on a game show called What's My Line that was very popular in the 50s. And she was very good at it. And apparently she was well loved by her guests. And she was so powerful as a journalist that Dorothy Kilgallen could make or break your career. She had even a feud with Frank Sinatra. You'll learn about that a little bit later as we go on. She was also involved in the Sam Shepard case. Sam Shepard was the doctor accused of murdering his wife, which was the basis allegedly of the hit TV series The Fugitive. And of course, we talked about this before. The attorney that was in that case, who passed away just this past week, was F. Lee Bailey, none other than F. Lee Bailey, a great litigator and attorney. So without further ado, let us bring on our brother and guest, Mr. Albert Lanier, veteran journalist. Hang on a second, Al. I'm trying to add you because I see you're here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Al to the show. Al, how are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, sir. I'm doing good. How's everything in lovely Hawaii?
Well, sunny, obviously, because it's close to summertime. I don't know if summer is like, I forget when in June, but officially summer happens in like late June or something like that. So it's close to summertime.
Okay.
Well, and the living's easy. Well, at least it's supposed to be. But
summer has started here, and it seems like it's going to be a cruel summer because it is so damn hot out in Louisiana right now.
Oh, really? Yes. So you're looking at a Bananarama song. Cruel summer.
Cruel summer. Yeah.
One song, summertime to cruel summer.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to do radio, so a long time ago. I used to play music, so a long time ago.
Oh yeah, which instrument did you play?
No. I should add that I used to play music on the radio.
Oh, that type of music.
To be more specific, I was a board op. That was my first job after I had graduated college. And before I became a freelancer, I played oldies rock music. Beatles, Stones, Doors.
Steely Dan.
I may have done Steely Dan. I don't know.
Well, we're glad you're here. Yeah. So, Mr. DJ. I'm on the replay. Okay, we'll get started in a second, Al, and we're talking about Dorothy Kilgallen.
Right.
This is what I want to do, especially when we talk about celebrity deaths. Now, why don't you, Key? I know a little bit about Dorothy Kilgallen. Why don't you start and tell? I told obviously a little bit of it to the people here, but perhaps you can share some things about her as a journalist.
Right. Well, Kilgallen, of course, was I think originally born in Chicago, and
That's
her
correct.
father, I think his name was James Lawrence Kilgallen,
Yes, he
was a
was.
journalist. Yeah. So it kind of, I hate to use the term, it ran in the family, but it seemed to have run in the family because Kilgallen was raised in a couple of different places. She was born in Chicago, was there for a little while. Then I think they were in Indiana, I believe, in Indianapolis, and then came to New York. The father, James, had a job, but I think it was the Journal American, but it was with the paper. And what happened was that Kilgallen, I think, had gone to college for a little while and then decided to drop out and get into the news beat or the newspaper trade. And she started writing. She eventually, as you had noted, she became a columnist. The interesting thing about Kilgallen as a journalist was, one, she became a celebrity because you had mentioned What's My Line. What's My Line, of course, was a panel show, and it was a hit show. And from what I understand, it had over 20 million viewers a week. And it was kind of an institution on the weekends. And the whole
Right.
premise of the show
Nice.
was to have a panel, and it was trying to guess what a person did for a living, and they would have like a mystery guest,
Right.
and but that was the whole point of the show. It was a guessing show, like you had to guess who this person. I think they had blindfolds and they couldn't see at
Yeah,
times. It may have been for the mystery guest,
they did for
but
the mystery guest. They would blindfold themselves, and these are the regular panel here. That's Kilgallen, that's Bennett Cerf, Arlene Francis, Mr. Block. I don't know who that is, but Steve Allen used to be a panelist on the show.
right.
Daly, John Daly was the
Basically,
host, but Daly was also the first anchor for ABC News.
hmm. Well, what was interesting is that What's My Line made Dorothy Kilgallen basically a celebrity,
Right.
turned her into a celebrity. And so, where before she had been working basically a journalistic career, I think she worked primarily for New York Journal American. And at one point, she was, she kind of had, she was a female journalist in an era where female journalists were not common, and especially newspaper women weren't all that common, and or at least not ubiquitous. And
Right.
she was, what was interesting about her career, from my perspective, having been written for a number of newspapers myself, um, and been partially a newspaper man, but also writing for magazines as a freelancer. What was interesting to me about her career was she was a Broadway columnist. She wrote a column called The Voice of Broadway. But she also wound up covering murder trials. So she did the Broadway celebrity beat, but she also covered murder trials. Like she ended up doing the trial of Sam Shepard, doctor accused of murdering his wife, which, as
Right.
you noted, became the basis for the TV show in the 60s called The Fugitive, which had, as an incidental point, one of the biggest finales, series finales of all time. It was like, I forget the size of the audience for the show. It was like over 70 million viewers or something like that. It was gigantic.
Right.
Don't quote me on that. But it was an enormous number. Enormous.
Well, at that
it would
time,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, at that time, you got the ambulance going out there. Yeah, at that time, the series, the season finale ended in 1967, And according to the final episode ratings that I see here, they said that it was viewed by 25.7 million households, 45.9% of American households with a television set at a 72% share, meaning that 78 million people tuned in. That record, of course, was broken on November 21st, 1980, because that was the Whodunit episode of Dallas, which was Who Shot
JR? Yeah.
Who Shot JR, and then of course, that got surpassed by MASH's series finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. So,
right. Just a bit of TV trivia for people.
TV trivia, yeah.
Trying to adjust this. My camera. Adjust my camera right here. All right, that's good. Little different angle, but
it'll work.
So Kilgallen had an interesting career, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Kilgallen had an interesting career. Like I said, she had mixed. She was a Broadway columnist, and she was doing the voice of Broadway column for, I think, with the Journal American in the 30s. But she was also covering trials, like she had done the Sam Shepard trial and had covered murder trials. So was kind of an interesting mix. She wasn't stuck doing one beat. At one point in the 30s, she had gone out to Hollywood to cover that town, I guess the film industry in that town for, I think it was the Journal American, possibly. But she had worked in Hollywood as a reporter, as a writer. And so her career was, I mean, the high points of her career, I think what she was known for was being a Broadway columnist, which had a lot of power because writers who review plays and deal with Broadway often make or break plays. Right. Because it's a very insular world.
Right. And she had that power, and she had the ability to make or break a career. And we'll talk about it in a second, but she had a feud with Frank Sinatra over a story that she had written that she wrote for a broadcast in 1948. And I'm noting here, she worked when she was 18 years old. She graduated from high school and actually got a job. She dropped out of college, the College of New Rochelle, and took a job as a reporter for the New York Evening Journal, where she worked at. And that newspaper was owned by the Hearst Corporation. I've done some research on the Hearst Corporation as well.
William Randolph. Yeah.
William Randolph Hearst, which is still in operation of almost over 100 years after this company was founded. It's still in operation, and they made news recently, a few years ago too.
Yeah. So well, like I said, she opted to get into journalism, and when you look at her career, it was interesting in that she wasn't kind of stuck. It was kind of unusual. I mean, some reporters do move from, say, one kind of beat to another. But I think her kind of career was kind of, would be unusual today. Moving from the kind of rarefied celebrity world, because she had done Hollywood for a little while, and then had come back to New York and ended up doing Broadway. She was a Broadway columnist, but she was also covering trials. Now, the reason I cite trials is important because she ended up being a reporter at the trial of Jack Ruby. But before I note that a little further, let me step back a bit and deal with why this was important. Dorothy was someone who was a friend of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was a senator from Massachusetts, who, as most people would know, went on to become president of the United States in 1961 when he was sworn in. And they were friends. In fact, I understand, and Mark Shaw, who is a former attorney, and author, wrote a book about Dorothy Kilgallen, I think called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. I think he also did one called Denial of Justice. I think that was kind of a follow-up. But Sean noted, I believe, that one of the things he stressed in talking about Dorothy Kilgallen was that Kilgallen and her son had visited JFK in the White House. And JFK had treated her son very nicely. In fact, JFK and Kilgallen were friends.
Right.
So when JFK was killed, excuse me. So when JFK was killed, Kilgallen was, of course, devastated, as were millions of people. But she was devastated in a very different way because she had been close with JFK. And it became clear that she wasn't going to buy the prevailing, the narratives that were being shaped at the time and that were eventually shaped about the killing of JFK. This was not only before the infamous Warren Commission report that was commissioned by Lyndon Baines Johnson, who became president after the death of JFK, who was his vice president, JFK was, but also before the Warren Commission report.
Well, let's do this. Let's go back a little bit to her death. What is the official cause of death? Was listed as a fatal combination of alcohol and barbiturates. And she was found dead at her townhouse, Manhattan townhouse on 45 East 68th Street. Now, you indicated that she was close friends with John F. Kennedy and was skeptical about the conclusions of the Warren report, which is listed here. And she published an article about a conversation that she had with Jack Ruby back on February 23rd, 1964. So just to refresh who Jack Ruby was the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald as he was leaving the Dallas Police Department in an escort. And
well, they hadn't left the police department. They were going to leave the police department. And it was on
process of transfer leaving,
right.
Yeah.
It was in the bottom parking lot, I believe. And
parking garage, yeah.
What happened was that Ruby, and this was, of course, live on television for those who may be unaware of it. Ruby went up to Oswald and shot him. And Oswald later died from the gunshot wounds inflicted by Ruby. And so Ruby, as I mentioned before, Kilgallen had covered the trial of Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was, of course, a nightclub manager. I'm trying to remember, owner, but he was involved in nightclubs.
That's the actual footage of it. I'm sorry, I want everyone to see this. This is the actual footage.
That's it.
Ruby, and watch Ruby is gonna come out at the right there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now he had, in truthfulness, there are pictures. He was actually stalking Oswald from the beginning. He was actually spotted inside the. He was actually inside, disguised as a as a reporter.
As a reporter, yeah, at a press conference.
At a press conference, he was pictured being there. So he was there, and this happened on Sunday, which was November 25th, if I'm not mistaken, when he shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
Mm.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'm sorry. Now, where were we? We were talking about.
Well, you had just shown the shooting of Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was at the time a suspect in the slaying of John F. Kennedy, and for whom the Warren Commission report that I noted earlier, which was commissioned by Lyndon Baines Johnson, who became the president, found guilty of the murder of John F. Kennedy. Now, the reason why we mention the JFK assassination is, as I mentioned before, Kilgallen was a friend of JFK, and she was a skeptic of the what some would call the official story. At that time, it was the developing, I would call it the developing narrative and developing story of the Kennedy assassination. And she started writing columns about the assassination and the aftermath. She had written a column, I think about noting that the Oswald case should not be closed. She was a skeptic, and she was investigating the Kennedy assassination. And I want to repeat that. She was investigating the Kennedy assassination. And the reason why that's important, because when we look at the death of Dorothy Kilgallen, you cannot separate her death from the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
Some people may try to, but it wouldn't make any sense. She was a skeptic of what was happening, what I call the developing narrative, and what became the narrative with the Warren Commission report. She was a skeptic, and she was very clear she did not believe that Oswald was the lone shooter who assassinated JFK. It was very clear. And so she was investigating the Kennedy assassination. In fact, she had covered the trial of Jack Ruby. She had gone to cover the trial. And in fact, she had interviewed, I think this is on film, she was interviewing Melvin Belli, who was a lawyer, I believe, for Jack Ruby at the trial. And I think there's film of that, because I just saw it today in looking up, doing some research on it. She was at the trial of Jack Ruby and had interviewed him. So she was one of the few people I understand to interview Jack Ruby. And that's pretty, well, it's not pretty significant. It's extremely significant, because Ruby was the last kind of figure, when you look at this assassination, major figure in terms of what went down in regards to assassination. Now, he was responsible for shooting Oswald, and he was found guilty and he served time for that. But it's significant when we deal with Jack Ruby, because she interviewed Jack Ruby, and she was a skeptic of the assassination, and she was investigating the assassination. And so when we note all of this, we then have to use this as the background upon considering her death. Okay. And as you noted, she was found in her New York apartment in New York. And the ruling at the time, I think initially they had thought heart attack. And then it was changed to sort of acute barbiturate and alcohol. Basically overdose. It is true, from what I understood, she did take barbiturates, from what I understand, prior to her body being found in November, I believe it was, of 1965. So that's interesting. My understanding is that I think her husband, I think his name was Dick Comer, I think, was also found in a similar manner. I think he died in the early 70s. I think initially he was ruled heart attack, and then it may have been, I think it was an acute barbiturate, or something to do with overdose.
Oh, he was an actor, right?
Right, actor and a Broadway producer.
He was an actor and Broadway producer. They had 3 children, Dorothy, and his name was Richard Colmar, and he died in 1971, 7 years after Dorothy. Supposedly, and I heard this, that Dorothy Kilgallen actually, I'm watching, of course, Mysteries and Scandals. They were talking about it. I think that she was having affairs, if I'm not mistaken, or.
Well, it's possible. I know that her husband, Dick, at the time, was rumored to be, playing the field, so to speak. Yeah. And I don't mean that. Normally, that's used in the single context of a single person, but I use it in the context of you know, adultery. I don't like that term, but adultery.
Yeah, that's what it is. But yeah, she okay, but yeah, we've heard and this is coming from I'm looking at Mr. I looked at a Mystery and Scandals episode that did on Dorothy Killed Gallon a while back, and I can't find it anymore. I think they took it off YouTube.
Yeah, it's funny. I had seen that years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know, was it years ago or I'm trying to remember. I may have seen it last year or the year before. I can't remember. I saw it at one point on YouTube, but you're saying it's not there anymore.
I cannot find that one right now. No. They Mysteries and Scandals. I mean, they had one even on a lot of people from Sam Cooke had one. Bing Crosby has one. His is George Reeves, a couple of people, the Marx brothers, Groucho Marx. Yeah. So
questionable deaths. Especially George Reeves. That's a question. That's slightly questionable or somewhat questionable.
Right. Now, someone said, Derek said, isn't Kilgallen isn't the woman who was murdered in the park? No, she was not.
She was found in her apartment.
She was found there in her apartment. Now, the book that you were talking about is written by a guy. I can't see his name here, but he wrote a book called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much.
Mark Shaw.
Mark Shaw. That's who you were referring to.
Mm-hmm. Right. He's looked into the death of Dorothy Kilgallen. I think he said he has a 12-year. I think he did research for 12 years or something like that. And his conclusion was that it was murder. And when I first came across the Dorothy Kilgallen case years ago, I can't remember how many years ago, because I guess, I've read about the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
And I also had read about people who had investigated it, researchers, reporters, so forth. And Dorothy Kilgallen's name had come up. And that's how I first found out about her death. And for years, I have found her death suspicious.
Right.
So Mark Shaw, who wrote the book, I believe it's called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, he believes it was murder. And I would agree with Shaw. In fact, I'm going to state here for the first time, because I've never talked about this before, I felt for years that Dorothy Kilgallen was murdered. For years. I do not believe that she died of an overdose. I believe she was murdered.
Okay.
And I believe it had to do with her reporting into the assassination of JFK.
President Kennedy. Yeah, well, what's interesting when you look at it in context, especially with the death of John F. Kennedy, most of the witnesses to the Kennedy assassination are people who have investigated it, died in mysterious circumstances. Lee Bowers, for instance, who was the railroad
track operator,
railroad track operator. So
he was in the tower. Yeah,
he was in the tower. The guy who took the autopsy photos, one of the men who took it, I believe his name was William Bruce Pritzker. He was at the autopsy where they saw Kennedy. They saw the photos. They saw where the bullet went through the left side of the temple. They could see the entrance wound, and they could see the back of the head, which was indicated there was some type of exit wound. He died. I believe he was. Well, they even ruled it a murder. He was killed, but they don't know who did it. Several people have died under mysterious circumstances there, tied with the Kennedy assassination. So that's what a lot of people speculate or believe that's what happened here in this case with Dorothy Kilgallen, is what she knew. Now, I do have a question as a reporter. The article that she wrote on Ruby, is that article still available, or whatever happened to it? Because usually when they have things like that, they cut those or you don't see them again.
It's funny. I'm not sure that's available. I'm not sure. I'm sure some of her columns might be. You would have to look up her columns. I think it was the New York Journal American. I'm not sure whether that interview with Ruby. It may be, I'm not sure. Can't say definitively. I do know she interviewed Ruby. I think it was more than once, but at least once.
Because
And
yeah,
I want, and again, your Chiron there, your statement, mysterious death is apt. It's a mysterious death. I really don't believe that Dorothy Kilgallen died of an acute barbiturate overdose
yeah.
onto herself. I do not believe it.
Who found the body?
That's a good. Well, she eventually, I think it may have been somebody who was working in the apartment, because it was somebody come into the apartment and found her in the bed. She was found in her bed. I know the police were called soon afterward, and that's when they made a determination. Well, not a determination, but when they, obviously transported her to the morgue and conducted, I'm sure conducted their examination. But again, the reason why I just want to stress this again, in case people are wondering why is this? It just seems like maybe she just had too many barbiturates, too much alcohol, and that's what killed her. Well, could be. And I know she had some health problems. She had some health problems at one point, but I consider it suspicious because she had been looking into the JFK assassination. Remember, she was a skeptic at a time when the media was very different. There was no YouTube in the early to mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Media, when you talk about media, you had the major media, ABC, CBS, NBC, in terms of the three networks. You had newspapers, of course, in New York and across the country. You had radio. So media was, what you had was major media. You had independent media, of course, like it's smaller media, but they didn't have the footprint, so to speak. I'd call it the smaller newspapers don't have what I call the print footprint. Sounds silly. Or the other stations, independent stations, whether TV or radio, didn't have the broadcast footprint. Another silly phrase that I'm using. But they didn't have the reach that the big three networks did, and of course radio and bigger radio stations and newspapers had. So there really wasn't a lot of room for, it wasn't like today where you can go on YouTube and you can doubt right after something has happened. You can go on Twitter, you can go on Facebook, which is social media, and you can raise questions about some event or some assassination or some death or something that's occurred. You can raise questions and you can be suspicious right away. That's both, one could argue it's an advantage, others see it's a big disadvantage. But media was very different. And so Kilgallen was somebody writing for, at least in New York, substantial enough newspaper. And she was raising questions about the Kennedy assassination, was investigating it. And that's why you have to look at her death as very, very suspicious, in my view. I've felt for years that she was murdered. And that asks the question, if she was murdered, why was that the case? And again, you tie to the Kennedy assassination, in my view. If there was something else, I don't know who else would have wanted to be involved in this kind of affair. I don't know.
Yeah.
disgruntled actors and producers on Broadway? I don't think so.
Well, what about what's interesting? There's a tie, and I'm not saying that he had anything to do with it, but Frank Sinatra, I know, did not like Dorothy Kilgallen. They were friends at one point, but she did a story. It's always been speculated about his ties with the mafia, and the mafia having a role in JFK's assassination. I don't know how far. I don't think the mafia would kill her just because she pissed off Frank, but
no,
that would be a stretch.
Yeah. Well, you got to understand, I don't want to get too far into Frank Sinatra, but I mean, Sinatra had friends that were in the mob because he was from New Jersey.
Well, yeah,
the whole Sinatra mob thing, in many respects, you got to understand, he was friends with guys probably from his own neighborhood and probably from parts of Jersey, because he's from New Jersey, that were in organized crime. That wasn't unusual. You come from certain neighborhoods on the East Coast. You could be friends with people in organized crime. You could know people growing up that turned out to be mobsters.
Right.
So that's not really.
When he denied it at when he was trying to get his gambling license in Las Vegas, that was outright bullshit. I mean, there were pictures of him with Carlo Gambino. I knew he knew Sam Giancana. He was actually one of the guests at the Havana conference in the 1940s when Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and a few of the mobsters who went to Cuba to discuss their plans. This was the big 1946 commission meeting where they talked about even taking out Bugsy Siegel. Not saying that Sinatra was part of it, but he was just a guest there. And he performed it. I mean, look, he actually used his mafia connections to help in civil rights stuff, because I think what happened was someone threatened, I believe it was Nat King Cole or something like that, and he actually had their goons come out and say, anybody who touches him, talking about these rednecks, he said, break their effing legs. So I actually like Sinatra because he was influential in the civil rights movement, but with a lot of stuff. But but he had ties with to say he didn't have ties was that'd be like you'd be living in La La Land.
Yeah, it's rather ridiculous. For me, I just go, he knew guys probably from his own neighborhood around there, and it's not unusual. It's not unusual. I mean, but getting back to Dorothy Kilgallen, I think I want to stress less how she died than why she died so much. And I think you have to look at the Kennedy assassination, because you look at its acute barbiturate and alcohol. She did reportedly take barbiturates and drank alcohol, of course. Right? So to me, I view it, and I believe she was murdered, whoever murdered her knew of a simple way to do it. I think she was found propped up in her bed. So it's kind of odd because she was like propped up in her bed. I think when she was found, it wasn't sure whether she was sleeping or getting up, at least at first blush. And then it was eventually pretty clear she was dead.
Right.
But she was investigating, in her investigation, not only had she interviewed Ruby, but she was looking at other aspects of the assassination. And I mean, this often happens with people who are investigating certain issues and certain events. A guy that I've been interviewed about in the past, on programs in the past, years ago, is a guy called Danny Casolaro. Danny Casolaro was a freelance writer and journalist who had wound up dead in West Virginia, at a hotel in West Virginia. He was investigating what was known as the Inslaw affair. And he was there in West Virginia, in a place called Martinsburg, West Virginia, to meet with a contact and like a couple of contacts. And he was found in his bathroom, which both was slit, in a bloody tub of water, which was odd because he was supposedly afraid of blood, very squeamish. But he supposedly, according to friends and acquaintances, said he had the piece that was involved in not only the Inslaw affair, was really what he called the octopus. So he was found dead. But you look at Dorothy Kilgallen, she's investigating Kennedy assassination. And she was looking into various aspects of the assassination. And, you know, she'd been investigating for weeks and a number of months. And I believe that, and it was very clear to me that whatever she was looking up and whatever she had found eventually led to her death.
Now I'm reading this. This is a article from PADailyPost.com. This is, of course, concerning Mark Shaw's book, and he sat next to the transcript of the Jack Ruby trial, which unveiled the lead columnist. Dorothy Kilgallen was following before her death in 1965. Purportedly, Kilgallen said that she had information that would have blown the case wide open.
Right.
Blown the whole case wide open. And the trial transcript, Shaw says, gave a lot of new material that showed Ruby was part of a conspiracy. And he figured out that San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli, who was Ruby's lawyer, was doing the mob a favor by having Ruby plead insanity so that the investigation would stop right there. But then it goes further and states that you see this picture here of Kilgallen. She clutched the files of notes and documents she was collecting in the JFK assassination. And purportedly, Shaw is stating that Ohio newspaper columnist spiked her drink with 3 lethal drugs. And this man was reportedly having an affair with her. But he also says it's likely he was spying on her at the behest of both the mafia, the FBI, or for individually, each one. So they had to target her, and that's in his book, Denial of Justice. And she was and here's some big things here now. She was murdered on November 8, 1965. And the next day.
She was found in November 8, 1965.
I'm reading the quote in the article.
Sorry.
She was murdered on November 8, 1965. That was obviously the date of the death. However, they found her dead. But however, a day before she was to travel to New Orleans. Now, at that time, New Orleans was the home turf of a crime boss named Carlos Marcello. And Marcello, famously, he and Bobby Kennedy were feuding. Bobby Kennedy actually had him privately deported and just dropped off in South America. I actually saw that in a documentary, which is very interesting. But, that's a connection with the JFK assassination as well. So at either rate, a few hours after she died, but before police arrived, they said that it was reported that they saw FBI men carrying files out of her Manhattan townhouse. And then again, the federal agents might actually have been members of the mob, Shaw allows. Either way, her notes and the files she was amassing on the JFK case were gone. Now, you also have to ask the question, why would the FBI, if they were there, be present when there was no federal crime that took place?
Right. Murder's technically not a federal crime.
Right.
Although they could insert themselves, I'm sure, if they wanted to, unless there was some national security reason.
Well,
But
it's
that would
similar.
be FBI counter intel that handles the intelligence side of.
Well, no, but that's how they. But that's basically they're telling on themselves by doing that because with Dr. King's assassination, for instance, Dr. King was killed in 1968, Memphis, Tennessee. This is not a federal crime. That's a murder. That's a state charge. When Judge Joe Brown, and I've had him on the guest, wanted to reopen the case, the feds got involved and tried to shut it down. Now, why would the feds want to shut down a 30-year-old cold case that purportedly had no jurisdiction on? They had no jurisdiction on it. That's because they were involved with it. That's how, J. Edgar Hoover was the FBI director, and it was long speculated. I mean, he was a racist. He did not like Dr. King at all. And
it's true.
My information, from what I've heard, that he actually was involved in this assassination. He had something to do even with Kennedy's assassination as well. At least he was an accessory after the fact. He wrote a memo, and we're getting off. It's kind of deals in topic with it, but he did write a memo about a meeting he had concerning the anti-Castro Cubans, and that was actually released through a Freedom of Information Act in 1988. And purportedly, one of the names in that memo was a guy named George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency. And that George Bush, everybody believed was President George Bush, but he was vice president at that time.
Right, George H.W. Bush.
George H.W. Bush. And he said it wasn't him.
Right.
But that's questionable because he was CIA director, purportedly with no experience at all. How did he get that position?
In the mid-'70s under, I think it's Ford, Gerald Ford.
Yeah.
No, not under Nixon. He was under Nixon. He was the head of the Republican National Party.
Right.
Chairman of the party under Nixon.
Well, Ford was Nixon's vice president, and then when Nixon retired, Ford became president. Right. Okay. So yeah. But either way, it was interesting. He got that position with no experience.
Well, you're appointed, so. Now you mentioned New Orleans, right? So when you talk about the JFK assassination, New Orleans figures in to the assassination in terms of the background because of Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was living in New Orleans.
Right. He's from there.
He was involved in handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba committee. In fact, he was on. He got into, I think, a scrape with these anti-Castro Cubans in New Orleans. Right. He was on a. I can't recall the show. He was on a radio show. He was on a TV show, and I think he was on a radio show, one or the other. And in New Orleans. So that's interesting. Now, Oliver Stone, who did the movie JFK, concentrates his film in New Orleans primarily because of Jim Garrison. Jim Garrison was the district attorney of New Orleans Parish in the 60s. And he was the one who had basically brought an investigation, actually brought a trial of a one Clay Shaw, who was involved in, I think, trying to remember the market there.
Clay Shaw was the head of the international trademark. I'm trying to think. He was a businessman, but he was the international trademark in New Orleans, and he was tied with David Ferry and a couple other people. And it was speculated, he was also working with Oswald and so forth. So
David Ferry belonged to Civil Air Patrol. Now, Oswald was a member of Civil Air Patrol because he had actually lived in New Orleans as a kid as well.
Right. Right.
So when he was young, he had lived in New Orleans, and he had joined Civil
The
Air
Marine.
Patrol. And reportedly, Ferry was in Civil Air Patrol at the time of Oswald, and supposedly may have known Oswald. So you have that aspect. And so, like I said, Oliver Stone in the movie JFK concentrated largely on New Orleans because Jim Garrison had looked into the Kennedy assassination and brought a trial linking Clay Shaw to the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
And of course, the trial didn't go too well for Garrison. Trial didn't go too well for Garrison.
No, it didn't.
No, did not. And I'm sure there's a lot of talk. I don't know if there's still talk about Garrison in New Orleans, in your neck of the woods there in New Orleans. But, you know, the thing about Shaw was that he was eventually found to have worked for CIA.
Right, because Richard Helms testified. Garrison's case was sabotaged from the beginning because even, I believe, Ferry died before he could testify. The judge would not allow the booking officer to testify that Clay Shaw actually used that alias Clay Bertrand.
Clay Bertrand.
Not allow him to use that to testify to that. So there were a lot of issues with it. I mean, his witnesses were not credible, including, so he didn't really have a strong case, although.
I wonder, see, this is why when you mentioned New Orleans and you mentioned Dorothy, I wonder if she found something in New Orleans or investigated New Orleans more like Garrison had. I wonder, I don't know where her explosive information was coming from, but I wonder if New Orleans was one area where that was the case. That's my curiosity about it.
Well, they raided before the Kennedy assassination, around Pontchartrain, Louisiana, or around Lake Pontchartrain. They were running those camps. They were running operations to invade Cuba. Because remember, when the Cuban Missile Crisis was going to happen, it's only 90 miles from New Orleans. New Orleans is the closest city to Cuba. So everything was going to come here. And they were people obviously concerned about what was going to happen and take place. And so obviously the government would have a very vested interest in New Orleans. And if you look at the declassified files, I can't think of the name of I think it was Operation Northwood.
I was just thinking about that. 1960, I'm trying to remember the date.
That was 1961, 62. They wanted to use a major disaster like that to engage in war. And this included American citizens being killed, and John F. Kennedy was opposed to that. He did not want to do that. So she was coming, but to get tied with Dorothy, she was coming down to New Orleans before she died. Probably she could have had some information to give to Garrison, because Garrison's, although his trial took place in 1967, I know he was still investigating it.
Right. Oh yeah, at that time it was. So that's why I say it's interesting with New Orleans, and whether she had found something, she was going to find something there, or whether, because New Orleans figures in. You can't, even if you believe that Oswald was the lone assassin, you have to look at New Orleans. You have to look at New Orleans in regards to the JFK assassination, because Oswald was there. Not only had he lived there previously, and when he was younger, and was in Civil Air Patrol, and David Ferry was in Civil Air Patrol, but you also had the fact that he was there and distributing leaflets. He had been in either radio or TV, done a TV show where he was interviewed, and was And so his time in New Orleans is very, very suspicious. So that's why I wonder if her information may have had something to do with New Orleans, or whether it had something to do with something else, or whether New Orleans figures into it somehow. That's what I'm wondering in regards to Kilgallen.
So, to put a period on this, or a question mark, Al, what's the stat? Has there been any recent developments to your knowledge on it? I know it's really kind of a cold. Well, it is a cold case, but
Right.
the good thing is homicides don't have a statute of limitations on it
No,
either.
they don't.
So
the last I heard, the author of The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, Mark Shaw, was interviewed, I think, a couple of years ago or so.
Hold on a second, Al. Just want to point everybody out. That is David Ferry. That's David Ferry. That's the guy that knew Oswald. They served in the Civil Air Patrol together, if anybody was asking. He suffered for something called alopecia, which means he lost all his hair on his body. He had no hair, so he would wear wigs and drawn up eyebrows on his he had drawn up eyebrows. But this is David Ferry, second from left, and Lee Harvey Oswald is on the far right there. I'm sorry. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, that was Dave Ferry. You showed a picture. I guess maybe he had a hairpiece or something. I don't know, but because he did suffer from alopecia. I don't know if that was a hairpiece. Looks like his hair. Maybe it was before he had the alopecia.
Before that, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. And so that's the curious thing. I hate to repeat myself, but that's the curious thing for me with Dorothy. I just wonder if New Orleans fits in with her, what she felt was going to be part of the explosive information that she was gaining.
But you were saying that before I interrupted you rudely, that they Shaw had something he was doing. He was asked on the radio or asked in an interview about this.
Who? Clay Shaw?
I'm sorry,
David Shaw. Oh yeah. What happened was, I think it was Mark Shaw, and he was the author of The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. My understanding was a couple of years ago, I think it was a Manhattan DA's office in New York had decided to reopen the case of Dorothy Kilgallen and investigate it. I'm not sure whether they reached a conclusion, because I hadn't tracked that. But that's what Shaw was saying in an interview, can be found on YouTube, about his book, I think in 2017. So this was like a couple of years ago or so, 2-3 years ago, or nearly 4 years ago. So apparently, I guess they were looking into the death of Dorothy Kilgallen. I'm not sure if they arrived at any conclusions or if it's still ongoing.
Well, this is actually interesting. I just happened to Google this. And first off, let me just say shout out to Bossa Queenie and Derek Bailey for being here in the chat. You guys see the link at the bottom. Please donate to the Cash App, Gavin Richard Esquire. Please donate to the Cash App. And we're talking about the mysterious death of my guest, a veteran journalist, Al Lanier, and I. We're talking about the mysterious death of Dorothy Kilgallen. I'm just looking at this article right now. It's on Yahoo News. This was just made a day ago, Al. It states here that Shaw has a new book called Collateral Damage. And now this book is saying new evidence sparks call to reopen JFK assassination inquiry. And topics mentioned just in this article: Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, Dorothy Kilgallen, Robert F. Kennedy.
Right.
So he fingers the mob and the Kennedy clan in the killings, and also that of famed reporter Dorothy Kilgallen. Shaw, using newly uncovered documents and fresh interviews, stitches the deaths together and puts the blame on Robert F. Kennedy for the deaths of all three.
Yeah. My understanding is that with Shaw, I think he believes that the mob was involved with the assassination of JFK. I think that's his conclusion, or one of his conclusions. Because I think he had looked into Melvin Belli. I think he knew him. He had practiced law in San Francisco. Mark Shaw did, and he had known Melvin Belli. Belli, of course, was a very well-known attorney. You had mentioned he was like one of the most famous attorneys, I think. Or did you mention? I can't remember.
I didn't mention that he was. Well, it said in the article.
I think Shaw did. I take it back. Shaw did. And Belli was a famous. In fact,
yeah.
It was one of the few attorneys I knew when I was growing up. So I knew who Melvin Belli was. And so he had looked in, I think, when Belli had died, because he knew Belli. He had, I think, tried to write a biography. I don't know if he did. But I think he had mentioned that Belli had known people in the mob. And I think that eventually led him to the Kennedy assassination, and because that's the belief of Mark Shaw, is that the Kennedy, that JFK was assassinated by, I think, the mob. I think that's his conclusion, or one of his conclusions. He's not the first to think that way, but that's what he thinks. What do I think? No comment.
No comment?
No comment.
Well, it's a very interesting story. Like I said again, and our brother Ron Hurd even made this point when he comes on the show, that nobody dies a natural death in the world of show business. He often says that. My thing is that, well, the mafia even had this saying that 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. But I'll say this as well. Even if the mob was a part of the JFK assassination, they certainly didn't have the power to cover it up some 50 years later by having the media lie about it all this time. So somebody even bigger was involved in it. It's more than the mafia. I mean, it's clear that the CIA and the government had ties, military, they all had ties to this assassination, and I'll stand by that. Who the individuals are, it's been speculated and noted. I won't say too much about it, but it's out there for the record. Go look at the research, look at the Freedom of Information documents released under the Freedom of Information Act, and you can draw your own conclusions. So, but
as for me, no comment.
No comment. Okay.
No comment.
All right, I'm safe here. I sleep with the lights on. I got the door locks, and I got my friend Glock with me all the time.
Interesting.
Like Clint Eastwood said, well, I can't leave. We can't let you out of here. Who's we, sucker? Well, me and my friends Smith and Wesson. Just yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and leave it at that. This was a great topic. Yep. So a lot of people enjoyed it. Dorothy Kilgallen. You guys can check out What's My Line. They have episodes on YouTube. You can look at her there, which was a very popular, as Al pointed out, popular game show.
Yeah.
1960, in the 1950s and the 60s, even to past the point when she died. And I enjoyed even watching some of the reruns of it. So you guys check that out. Check out the articles that I have in the comment box. You can go look that up. And also, Al, I'm going to let everybody know where they can contact you.
Well, you can contact me at Twitter at Critic Inc. at Critic INC. That's on Twitter. At Critic INC on Twitter. And on Facebook under my name, Albert Lanier. ALBERT. LANER. And that's how you can reach me on social media.
I'm gonna have to look at Mr. Shaw's book, Collateral Damage, and The Reporter That Knew Too Much. That might make some good reading. I've already started reading. I don't know if you know who this author is, but his name is Matt. I got it right here. He wrote The Quiet Dawn. He's an investigative journalist as well. Matt Birkbeck. That's him.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
I started reading it. He's got books on Sammy Davis Jr. He's did one on Russell Buffalino now called The Quiet Down. Buffalino, of course, everybody may know him as a result of the movie The Irishman, where Joe Pesci played him in the film. And purportedly, he was one of the most powerful mafia dons in the country. And he was actually the one that had final script approval of The Godfather. Because if you look in the movie, the word mafia is never mentioned, and they did not want that mentioned in the film. So they had a hand.
Apparently, he made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
They very much so. They made Paramount an offer they shouldn't refuse.
Right.
Yeah, and then they ended and they praised Carlo Gambino, who was the most powerful mafia don at that time. He was actually on the sets, and he had to approve Marlon Brando's performance. And I think after the famous the Orange Market shooting, he met Brando and applauded him. So that saved the film.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining me for this hour. You guys support Al again, and he'll be back on. We'll be talking about even more interesting stuff. So this has been an interesting day. Please donate to the Cash App, subscribe, like, and share. That's the only way to beat the shadow ban. But I thank you all for tuning in. Shout out to Derek Bailey. Shout out to Bossa Queenie. Yes, Bay, I am smart for sure. All people watching on my other self-entitled YouTube channel, I thank you as well. You guys have a great night. I'm going to get me some rest. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you are safe and doing blessed. Al, you take it easy.
You too.
All right, guys. It's been another edition of Gavin Richard Presents here on channel GBoot2786 and Gavin Richard, and on Facebook and on Periscope. I'll holla. Peace. See you Thursday.